of this pen is probably about 50 cents, maybe 47 cents. This is also the cost, this is also the amount of money that the government gives certain schools in Uganda. This seems odd because right now Uganda has a movement called Universal Primary Education, which states that all education for students is free. However, the government's only paying about 50 cents per school per term, and students are still paying $7, which for them is about 1,200 shillings, and it's way too much. This is just one example of one of the many setbacks that students encounter in their educational lives. Coincidentally, it's also one example of one of the many failures of a tried intervention. Today I'm going to talk to you guys about Uganda's educational situation right now. We're going to go over what Uganda needs, what the problems look like, what the numbers look like. Then we're going to talk about previous interventions on the governmental level and on a nonprofit level. And we're also going to look at my research grant proposal. So before we get started, I think it's good for you guys to see a chart of what education system in Uganda looks like right now. So we have primary school, which lasts about 7 years, and then after that you go into secondary school or into technical school, but oftentimes you go into secondary level. And then after that you have a ton of different options, as you can see on this graph. And primary school is just this itsy bitsy little portion down here. The problem with this, however, is that in order to get into secondary education, you have to pass an exam called primary leaving exam. And only 40% of the primary students who sit in for the exam even pass it. 40% get the chance to even apply for secondary education, which for us is high school. A couple years ago, there was a study taken, and primary education, there's 67 students enrolled in primary education, and only 18% of school-age students going to secondary. The school life expectancy in Uganda is 10 years, compared to 16 years in America. And the literacy rate is 65% compared to 99% in America. According to the World Bank, oh, I already did that statistic, so I won't say that one. So I also want to look right now at my causal analysis, and I want to explain to you guys how I got to the focus of my presentation of my grant. So unfortunately in education it's really intricate and really complex, and there's a lot of things that go into it. So as you can see based on this chart, it's too many things to find one root cause. And unfortunately, my heart led me to two different things. So you can see here that in blue I have funding and also poor or irrelevant curriculum. Two things that are really causing dropout rates and lack of enrollment, and therefore lack of jobs and lack of any sort of graduation or post-secondary schooling. A little bit later we're going to focus on funding, but I do want to talk to you guys about rote memorization, which is probably the biggest problem with the irrelevant curriculum. Most developing countries right now, their education system is focused on rote memorization. And the problem with this is that there's no interaction and it's all passive. And then this leads to disengagement. Disengagement and lack of engagement in schools is cited as the #1 reason why students in America drop out. I can't imagine what's happening in Uganda as well. So to address the funding problem, the government implemented something called Universal Primary Education in 1997. President Museveni declared that four students per household would receive free education. No school fees, uniforms are paid for, everything is free. Students can go to school for free. Now this is huge in Uganda because funding really is a problem. So obviously, as you can imagine, enrollment rates just rose immediately, so fast. And on the outside, this looks like a really good thing. Enrollment rates spiked from 57% to 85% enrollment. So that number I cited earlier, 67%, was in the midst of this. It rose to 85% enrollment. That looks awesome. 2.2 million students attended school in 1996, and in 1997, 6.6 million students attended school. This should be great, except for that the government didn't account for things like teachers, like resources, like space, so quality of education deteriorated. If you look at the student-to-teacher ratio, what happened in the first 2 years is that the enrollment rate spiked and there were not enough teachers. So the student-to-teacher ratio looked at from about 1 to 90 to 1 over 100. And I'm sorry, it's 1 over 100. So classrooms that were far smaller than this classroom had over 100 students in it, sitting on the floor, standing in the back corner, as you can see in these pictures. Just absolutely not a learning environment whatsoever. try taking your biggest lecture hall and sticking them in a building that looks like this. There are other unintended consequences of UPE as well. There was no encouragement to remain in the program because at this point the government had no place to put the students and no motivation to keep them there anyway. And as they tried to hire more teachers, a couple years after UPE was implemented, 40% of the teachers had no formal training, and 1 in every 10 teachers got their certificate after finishing primary school, which is 8th grade. Another intervention I wanted to talk to you guys about is a nonprofit in Uganda called Educate. Now, this program is founded on the belief that education should serve to empower Africa's next socially driven leaders. Educate helps them develop internally driven solutions to problems facing Uganda. Clearly, Educate's focus is not created for primary level students. However, the foundation of Educate and the curriculum that they teach serves as a universal model of effective curriculum. The leadership-oriented curriculum fights to disrupt the rote memorization problem that defines the developing world, and especially Uganda. In just a couple of years, in 2002 when this began, the first 22 scholars of Educate created 16 different initiatives, including tutoring programs, volunteer teaching, and counseling programs. They affected over 9,600 other people. Now, currently the research we have is just not enough. There's no environmental landscape that I can do. And my research is inconsistent with other research. And my research is inconsistent with what my coaches are telling me. And what people are experiencing is inconsistent all over the board. There's nothing that I can tell you right now that I know is going to help Uganda. And so I'm not proposing an NGO, and I'm not proposing any sort of nonprofit. What I'm proposing is that I go do more research in Uganda, and that I take a look at things like the primary leaving exam. And then I take a look at more things like why there's such a high spike in original enrollment, and then throughout primary, those 7 years, it decreases. And then there's a giant gap between primary and secondary, and why that's happening. And I have 2 hypotheses. There's one option is that this is solely based on financial problems, and that as you enroll originally, your finances dwindle, and you can no longer attend school. The other hypothesis is that the combination of rote memorization and of the primary leaving exam and of poor funding and of poor encouragement and of bad teaching, with all of those things combined, students are just not continuing in their education. So with these 2, depending on what I discover, I have 2 intervention possibilities. The first one, if it is, sorry, whole time, huh? If it is simply financial, then I propose that we partner with certain other organizations like the Tom's Shoes or Invisible Children. Invisible Children right now is collecting books all around the world, and they're really successful. They've got so many books, and they're bringing it to Uganda, and they're going into schools, and they have so much. I mean, they're a worldwide organization, and they have a lot of drive in Uganda right now. And the other one is Tom's, and what Tom's can do is they give a pair of shoes. This was your idea, a pair of shoes. Mm-hmm. If you buy a pair of shoes, they give a pair of shoes to someone in a developing nation who does not have shoes. And I didn't mention this before, but shoes are a huge part of going to school. It's against the law to not wear shoes when you attend school. And they cost about $3. And as I said earlier, $7 is the cost of school per term, and they can barely afford that, much less a pair of shoes. If the other thing is happening, and there's really just a combination of stuff going on, then I propose a primary Educate model. And what this will do is it'll start off small, and it'll have, there will be, a certain amount of scholars that receive financial support, so we'll address the financial problem immediately. And then there's also going to be, I just kind of want to stop right now. Is that okay?
That's great.
Okay.
That's great.
Because I'm just,
Good work.
yeah.
But girl,